The announcement came through every screen on Orin 9 at the same time. It was a single page. Plain text. No decorations. Professor Sorvak had never believed in decorations. The message told every student in the Academy's mixed cohort that their semester practical had been decided. Each student would choose one discipline, one field of knowledge or skill, and demonstrate its value to a panel of 5 faculty members. The demonstration had to be real, not a report, not a simulation, something that could be seen, measured, and judged in person. Most students began choosing within the hour. Darren read the announcement twice, set his datapad down on his bunk, and stared at the ceiling of his dormitory room for a while. His room was small. All the rooms on Orin 9 were small. The station had been built for function, not comfort, a long rotating cylinder floating in deep space, home to one of the galaxy's more respected academic institutions. The Galactic Academy of Sciences did not care much about comfort either. It cared about results. Darren was the only human enrolled that cycle. He had known that before he arrived. He had also known it would matter more than the Academy's welcome document suggested. It mattered in small ways every day. The way other students looked at him in the corridor, the way conversations paused when he entered a shared study room, the way his Krethian classmate Boval once described humans to a friend without lowering his voice, as if Darren were furniture. He did not hold it against them. Humans were still new to this part of the galaxy. New meant unknown. Unknown made people careful. He sat up, picked up his datapad, and opened the submission form for the practical assignment. In the discipline field, he typed one word: cooking. He submitted it before he could second-guess himself. The response came back in less than 10 minutes. It was from Sorvak directly, which meant the automated system had flagged the entry and pushed it up the chain. The message was short. It said that cooking was not a recognized academic discipline at the Galactic Academy of Sciences, and asked Darren to resubmit with a valid selection from the approved list. Darren wrote back. He was polite. He always tried to be polite. He explained that cooking was the applied science of transforming raw biological matter into a form that sustains life. It involved chemistry, thermodynamics, biology, and cultural anthropology. It had kept human civilization alive through ice ages, wars, and famines. It was, he wrote, possibly the oldest practical science his species had ever developed. He asked for a meeting. Sorvak was a Vreth, tall, slow-moving, with pale gray skin and 4 fingers on each hand. His office was neat in the way that suggested he found disorder personally offensive. He looked at Darren across a very clean desk and said nothing for a moment after Darren sat down. Then he said, "Cooking." "Yes," Darren said. "You want to cook something for your graded practical." "I want to cook for everyone in the building," Darren said. "Every student, every faculty member, every maintenance worker. One meal, prepared by me, served in the central hall. The panel can observe the preparation, the serving, and the outcome." Sorvak's expression did not change much. Vreth faces rarely did, but something shifted slightly behind his eyes. "There are 43 species currently resident on this station," Sorvak said. "Their dietary requirements are not compatible. Several species consume compounds that are toxic to others. 2 students are photosynthetic and do not eat at all. One of our maintenance staff consumes only living organisms, which presents obvious—" "I've already started the research," Darren said. Sorvak paused. "I spent last night going through the Academy's biological registry," Darren continued. "I have a list of every resident species and their dietary categories. I know which compounds conflict. I know who eats what and when. I'm not asking to make one dish and serve it to everyone. I'm asking to make the right thing for each person. 43 dishes if that's what it takes." The office was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, something beeped twice and went silent. Sorvak looked at Darren for a long moment. Then he looked down at his desk. Then he looked back up. "This is an unusual request," he said. "I know," Darren said. "It has never been done." "I know that too." Another pause. Sorvak folded his 4-fingered hands together on the desk. "If the panel determines that the work does not meet academic standards," he said, "there will be no second attempt. You will fail the practical and carry the grade forward. That's fair, Darren said. Sorvak studied him for another moment. Very well, he said. You have 14 days. The utility kitchen on sub-level 3 has not been used in some years. You may use it. Do not damage Academy property. Darren thanked him and stood to leave. One more thing, Sorvak said. Darren turned back. The Lindari students consume only high-density sugars. The compound range is specific. If you serve them something outside that range, the reaction will be unpleasant for everyone present. He said it flatly, like a warning, like a piece of data being transferred. But Darren had been watching Sorvak's face the whole time, and he had noticed something. The professor had not told him to pick something else. He had not called the idea foolish. He had given him a detail, something useful. I'll get it right, Darren said. He left the office and went straight to sub-level 3 to look at the kitchen. It smelled like dust and old metal and years of being forgotten. He stood in the middle of it and thought, this will do. Darren made a list. It covered 3 full pages of his data pad before he even started crossing things out. Every species on the station, their biological classification, their known dietary category, their listed restrictions from the Academy's medical registry. He worked through it the way his father had taught him to work through hard problems, one column at a time, no skipping, no assuming. His father had been a field cook in a remote research station on the edge of the Arctic. He had fed 17 scientists for 2 years with limited supplies and no resupply for months at a time. He used to say that feeding people well was 90% planning and 10% fire. Darren had always remembered that. The first problem he ran into was the Thren. There were 4 Thren students in the cohort. Their biology processed nutrition through a slow absorption cycle that only activated during a specific period of their circadian rhythm. Feeding them outside that window was useless. The food would pass through without benefit. Darren spent half a day cross-referencing Thren biological data before he found the window. 6 hours per station day. He marked it on his schedule. The second problem was the Crethian mineral requirement. Boval and 2 others in the Crethian group needed trace amounts of ferrous silicate in every meal. Not much, but without it, their metabolism stalled. The compound itself was harmless to most other species in small concentrations, but the Vreth were sensitive to it in any form. That meant he could not simply dust it across a shared dish. He had to contain it. Separate preparation surface, separate serving. He wrote that down. The third problem was Oriva. Oriva was Thren, which meant she fell under the feeding window rule. But she also had a secondary condition noted in her file, a rare metabolic variant that her species called the dry register. It meant her body processed standard Thren nutrition sources poorly. She needed a higher concentration of certain amino analog compounds that most Thren did not require. Her file noted that she had never eaten a prepared meal. Ever. Her entire life, she had consumed nutrition paste from a tube, the only format that met her specific needs reliably. Darren read that line 3 times. He got up, walked to the sub-level 3 kitchen, stood in the middle of it, and thought about it for a while. Then he went back to his room and sent Oriva a message. It was short. He introduced himself. He explained what he was doing. He asked if she would be willing to answer a few questions about what she could and could not tolerate. She did not respond that day. He went back to the list. The photosynthetic students, 2 Valori, did not eat at all. That was easy in one way, and complicated in another. They still came to meals, he learned. It was a social event for them. They sat near light sources. He made a note to position them near the hall's overhead panels and not to make them feel excluded. The maintenance worker with the living organism requirement was a Grenik named Rosk. His dietary need was genuinely difficult. Darren spent 2 hours thinking about it. Then he found a category of small cultivated organisms, a type of slow-moving brine fauna used in certain galactic cuisines, that were considered living at point of consumption and could be farmed in a small sealed tank. He ordered a tank and a starter culture from the station's supply depot. It arrived the next morning. Boval passed him in the corridor while he was carrying the tank back to the kitchen. Boval looked at the tank, then at Darren. Then he said, with the particular flatness that Crethians used when they wanted to be dismissive, without technically being rude. This seems like a significant effort for a grade. It is a significant effort, Darren said. You could have chosen computational modeling. Humans are capable of adequate performance in that discipline. Adequate, Darren said. Yes. I didn't want adequate. Boval looked at him for another moment, then walked away. On day 3, Oriva responded to his message. Her reply was formal and careful. She said she was willing to answer questions but wanted to know why he was asking. She had received nutrition queries from medical staff before. They were always clinical. His message had not felt clinical. Darren wrote back and told her the truth. He was trying to make her something she could actually eat, not paste. Real food. He did not know yet if it was possible, but he was not going to assume it wasn't without trying. There was a longer pause this time before she replied. Then she sent him her full medical file. Every compound her body could tolerate, every one it could not. The amino analog concentrations she needed, the textures her digestive system handled poorly, the temperature ranges her biology preferred. It was 12 pages. He read all of it. By the end of day 4, he had a complete menu, 41 separate dishes. Because the 2 Valori needed no food, only good light. Every restriction accounted for, every species represented, every person on the station included. He looked at the menu for a long time. It was the most complicated thing he had ever planned. More complicated than his entrance exams. More complicated than his first-year coursework. More complicated probably than anything the grading panel expected from him. He saved the file and started building his shopping list. He had 10 days left. He was not worried. He had learned how to plan from a man who fed 17 people through an Arctic winter, and that man had never once let anyone go hungry. Nobody on Orin 9 was awake at the 3rd station hour except Darren. He had set no alarm. He simply opened his eyes in the dark, lay still for a moment listening to the low hum of the station's rotation, and then got up. He dressed in the same clothes he had been wearing for 2 days. He picked up his menu, his notes, and the small, worn apron his mother had sent with him when he left Earth. Gray cotton, fraying at the strings, with a small burn mark near the pocket from an old accident. And he went down to sub-level 3. The kitchen was cold. He turned on the heating elements first, then the lights. The overhead panels buzzed for a second before settling into a steady glow that turned the old metal surfaces pale yellow. He stood at the main prep counter and looked at everything he had staged the night before. Ingredients sorted by dish, tools laid out in order of use, the brine tank in the corner, bubbling quietly, Rosk's portion already alive and waiting. He started with the dishes that needed the most time. The slow protein roast for the Crethian group went in first. Ferrous silicate dusted carefully into the marinade, prep surface cleaned and isolated before anything else touched it. The roast needed 4 hours at low heat. He set it and moved on. Next were the mineral broths for the 3 Vithani students. Vithani digestion was slow and cold. They needed liquids, not solids, and the broths had to be prepared at a temperature that most species would have considered barely warm. He built the broths from scratch, layering compounds in the order that preserved their structure, tasting nothing because the compounds were not for human biology, and the smell alone made his eyes water. He moved through the kitchen the way his father had moved. No wasted steps, no rushing, everything in its time. Around the 5th station hour, he made the Lindari preserves. There were 2 Lindari students. Their sugar requirements were precise. The molecular structure of the compound mattered as much as the concentration. He had ordered the correct base sugar from the depot and spent 3 evenings learning the reduction process from old records he dug out of a xenobiology food archive. The preserves needed to be cooked down slowly until the compound reached the right density. He stood over the small pot and stirred it for 40 minutes, checking with a test strip every 10. It came out right on the first try. He allowed himself one small moment of satisfaction, then moved on. Oriva's dish took the longest to think through, even though it was not the most complicated to prepare. He had gone over her file so many times that he had memorized the compound concentrations. The challenge was not the nutrition. The challenge was the texture. She had never eaten solid food. Her body could probably manage it based on her file, but he did not want her first real meal to feel like a medical experiment. He wanted it to feel like food. He settled on something soft. A slow-cooked grain preparation. Grains he had sourced from a trader database that carried Thren-compatible stock, broken down until they were almost dissolved, then built back up with the amino analog compounds at the right concentration, the temperature set to the exact range her file specified. He folded in a small amount of a mild natural sweetener that her biology flagged as safe. Not much. Just enough. He tasted a small amount on the back of his hand, where the skin was thin, to test the temperature. It was warm. Even. Quiet. The way simple food sometimes was. He sealed it in a container and labeled it with her name. By the 8th station hour, the kitchen was full of things happening at once. Timers going, smells layering on top of each other, the roast deep and mineral, the Lendari preserves sharp and sweet, something herbed from the Thren dishes, something almost smoky from a preparation he had built for a group of Dravari students who ate cured things. The brine tank bubbled in the corner. The broths sat in their warmers. Everything was labeled. Everything was on schedule. He had not eaten since the previous afternoon. Around the 9th hour, he cut a small piece of bread he had made for himself. Actual wheat bread, the only human dish on the entire menu, and ate it standing over the counter. It was plain. He had not had time to do anything interesting with it. But it was warm, and it was real, and it reminded him for a moment of his mother's kitchen, which smelled nothing like this alien station and everything like home. He folded the apron strings tighter and kept working. At the 11th station hour, every dish was finished. He stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at them. 41 containers, each one labeled with a species name, a student or staff name, and a small note he had written by hand about what was inside and why he had made it that way. He was very tired. He washed his hands, dried them on the apron, and went to the central hall to set the table. It took him 1 more hour to arrange everything. He positioned the Valori seats near the overhead light panels. He placed Rosk's sealed tank at the end of the table where there was space. He set out the Vethani broths in their warmers. He put Oriva's dish near the center, easy to reach. When it was done, he sat down at the table alone for a moment. Then he picked up his data pad and sent one message to every address registered on the station. It said, "Come eat. Central Hall. Now." He put the pad down and waited. The first person to arrive was not a student. It was a Grenic maintenance worker. Not Rosk, but one of his colleagues, a broad and quiet individual named Fetch, who serviced the air filters on sub-level 2. He had followed the smell through the corridor the way a person follows something they do not fully understand, but cannot ignore. He stood at the entrance of the central hall, looked at the long table, looked at Darren, and said nothing. Darren said, "You're welcome to sit. There's something here for everyone." Fetch came in slowly and found a seat near the end of the table. Then the Lendari students arrived together, both of them talking to each other until they stepped through the door and stopped. They had received the message like everyone else. They had come, Darren suspected, because the message had been strange enough to be interesting. They sat down and looked at the small sealed containers in front of their places. One of them lifted the lid. The sharp, sweet smell reached them, and something in both their faces changed, a loosening, like a question being answered. They began to eat without saying anything. More people came. They came in 1s and 2s and small groups, from dormitories and labs and offices. Some came because they were curious. Some came because a free meal on a station stipend was a practical matter. A few faculty members arrived looking slightly puzzled, as if they expected some kind of formal presentation, and found instead just a table with food on it. Sorvak arrived at the 20-minute mark. He stood at the entrance and took in the room. Most of the seats were filled. The hall was not loud. It was the particular kind of not loud that happens when a large number of people are all paying close attention to something. He found his place at the faculty end of the table. In front of him was a dish prepared specifically for Vreth biology, a cool, dense preparation made from compounds his species processed well, no ferrous silicate anywhere near it. He looked at the label. His name was on it. A small handwritten note below explained the preparation method. He read the note. Then he sat down. Darren moved through the room slowly, checking dishes, replacing anything that had cooled too far, stopping when someone had a question. Most people did not have questions. Most people were simply eating, which was the point. Orava arrived late. She came in quietly, the way she did most things, and stood near the doorway for a moment before finding her seat. She looked at the container with her name on it. She looked at the note Darren had written, explaining the amino analog concentration, the temperature, the grain base, and the reason for the sweetener. She read it twice. Then she opened the container. She held the spoon for a moment without using it. Around her, people were eating and talking in low voices. Nobody was watching her. Darren was on the other side of the room. She took a small amount and put it in her mouth. She went very still. It was not the taste alone, though the taste was gentle and correct, and nothing like the flat paste she had consumed every day of her life. It was something else. It was the fact that someone had read her file and thought about her specifically, not as a case or a restriction or a problem to solve, but as a person who deserved something real. She sat with that feeling for a while. Then she kept eating. Boval arrived toward the end of the first hour. He had told Darren it was a waste of time. He had said it with the comfortable certainty of someone who believed the outcome was already settled. He came into the hall and found his seat and saw the Creathian dish in front of him. Properly prepared, ferrous silicate in the right concentration, the roast cut correctly for Creathian jaw structure, the label handwritten with his name. He sat down. He looked at it. He ate. After a few minutes, the Thren student in the seat beside him, a quiet individual named Preth, whom Boval had shared a study floor with for 2 years without once speaking to, said something about the dish. A small observation. Something about the smell being unexpectedly close to a preparation from his home region. Boval looked at Preth. Preth looked back. There was a pause of the kind that happens before something either ends or begins. Boval said, "Your home region uses ferrous compounds in cooking?" Preth said, "Not exactly, but there is an overlap in the mineral profiles." Boval considered this. Then he said, "That is unusual. I was not aware Thren cuisine had that characteristic." "Most people are not," Preth said. They were quiet for a moment. Then Boval asked another question. A real one, with actual curiosity behind it. Preth answered. They kept talking. Darren was refilling a broth warmer at the other end of the table and did not hear any of this. He was not trying to engineer conversations. He had no plan for what happened after people sat down. He had only planned the food. But the food had done something he could not have drawn on a chart or submitted in a report. It had made the room smaller. Not the physical room. The distance inside it. The space between people who had lived on the same station for years and eaten alone in their quarters every single night. That space had not disappeared, but it had shifted, moved in slightly, like chairs being pulled closer to a fire that nobody had expected to find burning. Darren set down the broth warmer and looked at the hall. Every seat was full. He went back to the kitchen to check on the remaining portions, and he allowed himself, very quietly, to feel something close to glad. The meal was supposed to last 1 hour. It lasted 4. Nobody announced an extension. Nobody suggested that people stay. They simply did not leave. The grading panel had arrived expecting a presentation with observable outcomes and a clear endpoint, and instead found themselves sitting at a table with food in front of them, surrounded by students and staff who were still eating and talking 2 hours past the scheduled conclusion. Panel member Drevith, a compact and precise Vithani professor who had never once run a faculty meeting past its allotted time, was on her 3rd cup of the mineral broth when she realized she had not thought about her afternoon lecture in over an hour. She noted this fact to herself. She did not get up. At some point during the 2nd hour, the research dispute started to resolve itself. It had been going on for almost a year. The Creathian research team and the Thren postgraduate group had been trying to share access to the station's deep field sensor array, and every formal session scheduled to divide the access time had ended in frustration and filed complaints. The 2 department heads, Sorvak's colleague Wraith from the Krethian side, and a Thren senior researcher named Avos, had not spoken directly in months. They ended up sitting near each other at the table because of where the dishes were placed. Darren had arranged seating by dietary zone, not by department or species relation. It was a practical decision, nothing more. Wraith and Avos were both eating. They were not speaking yet, but they were in the same physical space, without a conference room and a formal agenda and 18 months of official friction between them. Just food and a table and the low hum of a room full of people who were mostly comfortable. Wraith said something to Avos around the 90-minute mark. It was a small thing, a comment about the mineral content of the dish in front of him, a genuine observation, not an opening move in a negotiation. Avos responded. They talked for a while. Carefully at first, the way people do when they have been careful for a long time and are not sure what happens if they stop, then less carefully. Then Wraith pulled out his data pad, not to check messages but to show Avos something, a chart, a data set, something from his own work. Avos looked at it. He made a comment. Wraith adjusted something on the pad. By the third hour, they had sketched a preliminary access schedule on the back of a paper note that one of the Lindari students had left on the table. Informal, not official, not filed anywhere, but real. In another part of the hall, 2 second-year students, a Vreth named Coral and a Dravari named Set, had been in formal grievance proceedings against each other for 3 months over a lab equipment dispute. Their case was scheduled for a mediation hearing the following week. They were sitting at the same table because the station was not large enough to have avoided each other forever, and the meal had removed the usual excuses people use to stay on opposite sides of a room. They did not resolve their dispute during the meal, but Coral asked Set a question about something unrelated to the lab, something about a study material Set had mentioned once in a shared seminar. Set answered. The conversation moved sideways from there, away from the conflict entirely, into a space where they were just 2 students eating at the same table and discovering that there was, possibly, a person on the other side of the disagreement. That would not fix everything, but it was somewhere to start. Station Administrator Calden arrived at the beginning of the 3rd hour. She had called Sorvak to ask why the entire faculty was unreachable, and Sorvak had told her, in his exact and unhurried way, that she should come to the central hall and see for herself. She arrived expecting disorder. She found the opposite. She stood at the entrance for a moment, taking in the room, the full seats, the ongoing conversations, the food that had clearly been prepared with significant care, and then she walked to the end of the table and sat down. Darren brought her a dish. He had not known she was coming, but he had made extra portions because his father had always made extra portions, and because running out of food when there were still people to feed was a failure he was not prepared to accept. Calden looked at the dish. She looked at the hall. She looked at the 2 department heads on the far side of the table who appeared to be working something out on a paper note. She said nothing for a long time. She ate. Sorvak, who was seated nearby and had watched the room for the past 3 hours with the careful attention he brought to everything, leaned slightly toward her and said in a low voice, "He researched every species individually. 41 separate dishes." Calden said nothing. "He also positioned the Valori near the overhead panels," Sorvak added, "so they would not feel excluded." Calden turned to look at the 2 Valori students who were sitting comfortably in the bright overhead light, not eating, but present and clearly part of the room in a way they often were not. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "Who approved this practical?" "I did," Sorvak said. She looked at him. "It seemed," Sorvak said carefully, "like something worth seeing." Calden looked back at the room, at the full table, at the conversations happening across boundaries that had seemed very fixed 3 hours ago, at the human student moving quietly through the hall, refilling warmers, checking on people, asking nothing in return. She picked up her fork and kept eating. The grade came 3 days later. Darren was in the sub-level 3 kitchen when Sorvak's message arrived. He had been cleaning. Not because anyone asked him to, but because that was how he had been raised. You used a kitchen, you cleaned it after. He was scrubbing the mineral prep surface when his data pad lit up on the counter beside him. He dried his hands and read it. The score was listed at the top, highest practical mark recorded in the Academy's graded history. Below it, Sorvak had written the panel's formal assessment. Darren read it slowly, standing at the counter in the old kitchen that still smelled faintly of the previous day's cooking. The panel cited, comprehensive cross-species biological research conducted independently without faculty assistance. Logistical planning that accounted for 41 separate dietary requirements with 0 reported adverse reactions. Successful preparation of all dishes within a single work period by one individual. Demonstrated understanding of food as cultural infrastructure. And finally, a line that Darren read twice. Informal resolution of 4 ongoing interpersonal and interdepartmental conflicts during the course of the event, which the Academy's formal mediation process had failed to resolve over a period of 18 months. He set the pad down. He stood there for a while, not thinking about very much. Then he folded his apron, set it on the counter, and went upstairs. Oriva was waiting outside his dormitory. She was standing in the corridor in the careful way she stood when she was uncertain about something. Her hands folded, her weight shifted slightly to one side. When Darren saw her, he stopped. She looked at him and did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "I wanted to ask you something." He said, "Okay." She said, "How did you know what to make for me?" "My file has been in the medical registry for 2 years. The staff nutritionist looked at it once and told me that paste was the most practical solution." Darren thought about how to answer that. "I read the file," he said. "The nutritionist read it too," she said. "I read it like I was trying to figure out what to cook," he said. "Not like I was trying to figure out what was safe." "Those are different questions." Oriva was quiet for a moment. "They came out to different answers," she said. "Yes," he said. "They usually do." She thought about that. Then she asked if he would be willing to show her what he had done, the menu planning, the ingredient sourcing, the process of reading a dietary file and turning it into actual food. Not because she wanted to cook. She was not sure about that yet. But because she wanted to understand the thinking. Darren said he would. They agreed to meet in the kitchen the following morning. He went inside and sat down on his bunk and looked at the ceiling for a while. His data pad was on the bed beside him. He had messages from 3 other students, a Dravari and 2 Vithani, all of them asking variations of the same thing Oriva had asked. "How did you do this? Can you show us? Is this something that can be learned?" There was also a message from Calden. It was brief. She said that the utility kitchen on sub-level 3 was being officially reinstated as an active academy facility. Maintenance had already been scheduled. She said that a formal curriculum proposal for applied xenogastronomy, the science of cross-species food preparation, was being drafted and would be circulated to department heads within the month. She said that Darren's name would be noted as the originating student contributor in the proposal documentation. She did not say anything personal. She was an administrator. She expressed things through action. That was fine. Darren understood that kind of language. He put the pad down and thought about his father. His father had never done anything famous. He had fed 17 scientists through an Arctic winter, kept them warm and fed and functioning when the work was hard and the isolation was heavy. None of those scientists had written papers about it. Nobody had issued a formal statement recognizing it. But every one of them, Darren knew, had eaten and felt less alone. He thought about the hall 3 days ago, the full table. Oriva going still over her first real meal. Boval and Preth talking across 2 years of silence. The department head sketching a schedule on a paper note. The Valori sitting in the light, not eating, but present. He had not planned any of that. He had only planned the food. But food, he had always known, was never really just food. It was the thing underneath the food that mattered. The research. The care. The willingness to read someone's file like their comfort was worth your time. The decision to ask what a person needed instead of assuming they could adapt. He picked up the pad and replied to all 3 students. He said, "Yes, I can show you. Come to the kitchen whenever you are ready." He put the pad down and got up and went back to sub-level 3, because the kitchen was still not fully clean and that bothered him, and because he was already thinking about what to make when they came. Some things were very old, older than the academy, older than the station, older than the first time a human being stepped off a planet and looked at a galaxy full of strangers. The oldest of them was this: you feed someone, and you are saying something that does not need a word in any language to be understood. You are saying, I see you, you are here, and you matter. Darren picked up his cloth and kept cleaning.